Welcome, curious minds and gentle dreamers. Tonight, let us drift across time to the shores of ancient Greece, where divers stumbled upon something so astonishing that even modern scientists still puzzle over it. A device forged in bronze and mystery, a machine that could read the sky as if it were a book. This is the story of the Antikythera Mechanism, a testament to human ingenuity hidden beneath the waves for 2,000 years, waiting to reveal its secrets. Make yourself comfortable and let your imagination sail to an age when philosophers and craftsmen set their sights on the stars. How the Antikythera Mechanism predicted the heavens so precisely. Chapter 1. The Storm and the Discovery. In the spring of 1900, sponge divers set out from the island of Simi, their wooden cakes creaking under the weight of nets and provisions. The men had no intention of discovering lost wonders. They came to harvest the bounty of the Aegean, but fate often hides its gifts in the places we least expect. One afternoon, as they searched for promising shallows off the coast of Antikythera, a sudden squall darkened the sky. The divers, seasoned in the unpredictable moods of the sea, dropped anchor near a sheer cliff that plunged into deep water. When the storm passed, the men decided to explore the seabed. Curious about what might lie below the cliffs, Elias Stadiatis, an experienced diver, strapped on his heavy copper helmet and descended into the depths. At nearly 50 meters, the pressure was almost unbearable, but he pressed on. There, among a tangle of amphorae and marble statues, he glimpsed something that took his breath away. The wreckage of an ancient ship, its cargo spilled across the sand. When Elias surfaced, he described a submerged world littered with bronze and stone, horses, torsos, and broken pottery. Elias spent time sitting beside his wife, who shepherded him and his mother through the undersea set. He saw the first party. Though the crew at first believed he was raving from the pressure, they soon realized he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Word reached the Greek authorities, and by the end of the year, a team of divers and archaeologists had arrived to recover the treasures. Piece by piece, they lifted statues caked in barnacles, pottery shards, and unfamiliar lumps of corroded bronze. Among these was an object no larger than a shoebox, encrusted and unrecognizable. At the time, no one suspected this fragment was the most important discovery of all, a device that would come to be known as the Antikythera Mechanism. In the months that followed, the wreck yielded dozens of wonders. The newspapers spoke breathlessly of bronze athletes and marble philosophers. Museums vied for the chance to display the recovered sculptures, but the corroded gears, resting quietly in their crates, drew little attention. It was only later, as conservators began the patient work of cleaning and cataloging the fragments, that the enigma revealed itself. Under the crust of centuries, they found a lattice of tiny teeth, gear teeth, impossibly delicate, wrought in a time when no one believed such precision was possible. At first, scholars dismissed it as an astronomical toy or a curious clock. Few could imagine that this battered mechanism was a window into the ancient mind, a machine so complex that it would challenge everything we thought we knew about Greek science. And so, in the quiet storerooms of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, the Antikythera Mechanism waited for someone to see beyond the corrosion and recognize the brilliance hidden within. This was the beginning of a century-long effort to understand how ancient hands built a device that could chart the heavens, a device that, even today, has not given up all its secrets. Chapter 2. A Puzzle in Fragments. Long after the wreck was emptied of its more glamorous treasures, the fragments of the strange bronze device lay in drawers and cabinets, labeled simply as bronze lumps. Few curators knew what to make of them. They were not statues to admire or coins to catalog, but something altogether unfamiliar, something that defied easy explanation. It was in 1902 that Valerios Staias, a diligent archaeologist overseeing the finds, first noticed a row of teeth cut with such precision that they resembled the workings of a clock. He called his colleagues to examine the piece more closely. There, embedded in the corroded mass, they saw the unmistakable form of a gear. At first, even this observation caused little stir. In the early 20th century, scholars did not expect to find mechanical sophistication in the ruins of Greece. The idea that ancient craftsmen had created intricate machines seemed fanciful. It clashed with the accepted notion that technology advanced slowly, in a line that led neatly from the Greeks to the Romans to modern Europe. But over the following years, curiosity about the artifact began to grow. Historians, instrument makers, and astronomers all came to see the fragments. Some speculated it was an orrery, a model of the solar system. Others insisted it must be a simple calendar, a contrivance for marking the passage of seasons. Still, no one could agree on how such a device had come to rest in the hold of a shipwreck from the 1st century BCE. The Antikythera Mechanism, as it would later be named, was eventually reassembled into several main plates, each supporting clusters of gears and inscribed dials. Though parts were missing, the surviving fragments told a story of astonishing ambition. The sun, still faintly pulsing. The sun, still faintly pulsing. The sun, still faintly pulsing.
The sun seems those beams
Along the largest preserved gear, 223 tiny teeth interlocked with smaller pinions. Around them, scales and inscriptions had been carved so finely that they were almost invisible to the naked eye. A ring of Greek letters encircled one of the dials, their purpose still uncertain. The craftsmanship confounded every assumption. Metalworkers of the era had undoubtedly mastered the casting of bronze statues and weapons. But here was something else entirely. A device that required not just skill, but a system of thought capable of imagining the movements of the heavens in mechanical form. In the decades that followed, attempts to decipher the mechanism proceeded slowly. 2 world wars interrupted scholarly work. Fragile as they were, the fragments could not be handled recklessly. For many years, they remained locked behind glass, admired but not understood. Then, in the 1950s, a physicist named Derek de Sola Price began a systematic study of the device. Price was fascinated by the interplay of science and culture. He believed that artifacts such as the Antikythera Mechanism were not simply curiosities, but windows into the minds of the people who built them. Working with Greek colleagues, he examined every surface, every gear, every inscription. So, with Price working with every surface, every gear, every inscription with patience and determination, he began to reconstruct the logic behind the corroded plates. His research culminated in a landmark paper titled Gears from the Greeks, published in 1974. In it, he argued that the device was an astronomical computer, capable of predicting the positions of the sun and moon, eclipses, and perhaps even the cycles of the known planets. For many, this was a revelation. The Antikythera Mechanism was no mere curiosity. It was evidence that more than 2,000 years ago, Greek scholars had reached a level of technological sophistication no one had imagined. But Price's work was only the beginning. In the decades after his death, advances in imaging technology would reveal more details, more inscriptions, more clues to how the mechanism truly worked. X-ray tomography, developed in the early 2000s, allowed researchers to peer beneath layers of corrosion without damaging the delicate bronze. Each scan revealed hidden gears and engraved texts that had been invisible for centuries. Piece by piece, the machine yielded its secrets. Scholars began to identify the purpose of each dial. They could see how the gears interacted, how turning a small handle on the side of the casing set the entire system in motion. Even so, mysteries remained. Dozens of questions about the missing components, the precise functions of certain scales, and the identity of the maker still lingered. But one fact was clear. The Antikythera Mechanism was the most sophisticated mechanical device known from antiquity. Nothing remotely comparable would appear again in the historical record for more than 1,000 years. In a world without factories, lathes, or precision tooling, some unknown craftsman, or perhaps a workshop of them, had conceived and executed a machine that could track the heavens themselves. Standing in the quiet gallery of the museum, visitors often found themselves transfixed by the fragments. Under the glass, the gears seemed almost alive, like the fossilized bones of an idea too audacious to belong to the past. What inspired its maker? How many minds had contributed to its design? And why did this technology vanish, leaving so little trace behind? These questions would inspire generations of researchers to look deeper, to scan more finely, and to reimagine what the ancient world had been capable of achieving. The Antikythera Mechanism was no longer simply a puzzle. It had become a bridge across time, linking the curiosity of modern science to the daring brilliance of a forgotten age. And in the decades to come, each discovery would reveal how much more remained to be learned. That lifted irrigation channels to higher ground, the compound pulleys that allowed a single sailor to haul enormous weights, the polished mirrors said to have set enemy ships ablaze in the harbor. Yet, of all his achievements, perhaps the most remarkable was his understanding that mathematics could model nature with astonishing fidelity. In later writings, ancient historians described a planetary device he created, a sphere that demonstrated the paths of celestial bodies. Cicero himself claimed to have seen this globe, turning by means of hidden mechanisms to show the rising and setting of the stars. Whether the Antikythera Mechanism was a direct descendant of Archimedes' sphere can never be proven, but the resemblance is too striking to ignore. Indeed, the cities of the Hellenistic world were full of scholars who carried forward Archimedes' vision. In Alexandria, the museum and the great library stood as beacons of knowledge. There, mathematicians and astronomers copied Babylonian records of eclipses and refined them with Greek geometry. They devised tables predicting solstices and equinoxes, and they debated the best ways to harmonize lunar months with solar years. Out of this ferment came the concept of the Metonic cycle, 19 years in which the moon's phases would realign with the solar calendar. The Metonic cycle would later appear as one of the guiding principles encoded into the Antikythera Mechanism's gears, proving that its creators drew on centuries of accumulated wisdom. Yet, for all their learning, these scholars were not abstract thinkers alone. They were practical artisans as well, men who knew how to file bronze to an edge fine enough to catch a star's reflection, or how to carve tiny symbols with steady hands. The mechanism embodies this fusion, the union of theoretical astronomy and the hard-earned skill of the workshop. As modern researchers pieced together the fragments, they found the Metonic dial among them, inscribed with Greek letters that denoted each year of the cycle. Another spiral tracked the Saros cycle, a period of 18 years after which eclipses repeat. Together, these scales allowed the operator to anticipate celestial events with a precision that would not be rivaled until the Renaissance. But the true wonder was not only in the accuracy of the predictions. It was in the very idea that time itself could be translated into cogs and wheels. To modern eyes, accustomed to clocks and computers, this may seem unsurprising, but in the 1st century BCE, no such devices existed. Sundials could mark the hours, and water clocks could measure intervals, but nothing yet combined these tools into a single instrument capable of modeling the heavens. What prompted the maker, or makers, to attempt such an ambitious project? Perhaps it was patronage, a wealthy individual commissioning an object to display his status as a connoisseur of science. Perhaps it was a gift intended for a temple, a demonstration of piety toward the gods who governed the skies. Or perhaps it was the culmination of a lifetime of study, a craftsman's final testament to his skill and curiosity. Over the years, every plausible theory has found its champions. Some argued that only the city of Rhodes, with its famed school of astronomy and engineering, possessed the knowledge to create such a marvel. Others suggested that Pergamon or Alexandria, equally renowned centers of learning, were the cradle of its invention. Whoever built it, they left behind no signature, no surviving treatise describing the steps of its manufacture. The mechanism was found without instructions, its meanings hidden behind layers of corrosion. To reconstruct it, modern scholars have had to reverse engineer the mind that conceived it, examining each fragment not just as a piece of metal, but as a fragment of thought. In this way, the mechanism became more than an artifact. It became a conversation across millennia. Each hypothesis about its function was a question posed to the past. Each new scan or measurement, an attempt to hear the answer. The 21st century brought an acceleration in this dialogue. X-ray tomography, computer modeling, and high-resolution photography revealed previously invisible inscriptions, text so small that even the most patient curator could not have read it unaided. These hidden letters listed cycles of the moon, noted the timing of eclipses, and named Greek cities whose calendars were represented on the dials. Every revelation added depth to the story. The mechanism was not only a machine for predicting celestial events, it was also a compendium of practical knowledge, a guide to the festivals and civic schedules that shaped everyday life. In ancient Greece, the heavens were not distant abstractions. They governed agriculture, religion, and the rhythms of the city. Knowing when an eclipse would darken the sky was as important for arranging temple rituals as it was for measuring the passage of time. As scholars translated the texts, they began to appreciate the scope of the project. To build this device required mastery of geometry, metallurgy, and astronomy. It required artisans who could grind bronze into precise flat plates and cut interlocking teeth at exact intervals. It demanded scribes who could inscribe hundreds of characters on a surface scarcely larger than a playing card. And it required vision, a conviction that the turning of the cosmos could be made tangible, predictable, comprehensible to human hands. In that conviction lay something as profound as any technological achievement, a faith in reason itself. This spirit, the belief that knowledge is worth pursuing, even when the tools are crude and the materials limited, echoes down to our time. To hold a replica of the mechanism is to feel that optimism made solid. It is to glimpse the moment when ancient craftsmen dared to imagine a universe ordered not by caprice, but by laws that could be measured and shared. The Antikythera Mechanism was, in its own way, an heir to Archimedes' dreams. It stands as proof that no generation invents curiosity from nothing. Each inherits the questions and the aspirations of those who came before. And as researchers continue to study this improbable relic, they are reminded that the pursuit of knowledge is itself a kind of inheritance, passed from hand to hand, wheel to wheel, across the ages. Chapter 4. The Ship That Carried the Stars. The Antikythera Mechanism's discovery was a triumph of happenstance as much as scholarship. It might easily have remained on the seafloor forever, unseen by any modern eye. To understand how such a treasure came to rest beneath 40 meters of water, we must first consider the ship that bore it across the Aegean. In the 1st century BCE, the Mediterranean was a thoroughfare of commerce. Merchant vessels stitched together a network of ports and harbors, ferrying goods from Alexandria to Rome, from Rhodes to Massalia. Amphorae of wine and oil, crates of glassware, bolts of dyed cloth, and ingots of copper moved in steady currents along these routes. The ship that would meet its end off Antikythera was likely bound for Italy. Based on the other artifacts recovered, bronze statues, marble sculptures, and fine ceramics, many historians believe it carried the spoils of a wealthy Roman shopping expedition, or perhaps a shipment destined for the estate of an aristocrat eager to display the latest marvels from the Hellenistic world. Her hull, built in the shipyards of the eastern Mediterranean, was stout enough to withstand the capricious winds and waves of the crossing. And, like many indigenous craft of this era, she boasted a tidy boat, but a slippery dock. Many historians believe the ship, destined for the wastes of the eastern Mediterranean, was actually a ship eager to display the latest wealth of the crossing. Make sure many of the historians' findings are reflective of the consumer passions and biases connected to the high trades in the region. Many link gold to the precious winds and waves of the cross. She measured an estimated 40 meters in length, large even by the standards of her time. Some scholars have speculated that she required a crew of at least 20 to manage her sails, oars, and cargo. Among her precious freight lay the mechanism, protected within a wooden casing, secured in the hold alongside other prized objects. Whether the captain or the sailors knew of its significance is impossible to say. Perhaps to them, it was just another curiosity among many, a fine gift, an elaborate toy, or a symbol of learning that only the wealthy could afford. The Antikythera Strait has always been notorious for sudden storms. The winds funneled between the islands with little warning. On the day of the disaster, such a gale must have struck without mercy. No written record survives to describe it, but the evidence is plain. The hull broke apart, scattering amphorae and statues across the seabed. The cargo was buried under silt and collapsed timbers, preserved for nearly 2,000 years in cold darkness. When divers first descended in 1900, they were astonished by what they saw. Limbs of bronze figures, marble torsos, lying like the fallen remnants of some sunken gallery. In the midst of this spectacle, the corroded lumps of the mechanism seemed almost insignificant. Yet it was the mechanism, not the statues, that would ultimately reshape our understanding of ancient technology. To imagine the moment the ship foundered is to glimpse the fragile chain by which knowledge survives. One squall, more severe, one more rock to dash the hull, and the fragments could have been pulverized beyond recognition. One shift in the currents, and the cargo might have been lost to the depths, never to be retrieved. It is this tenuousness, this improbable survival, that lends the mechanism its haunting power. If any link in that chain had broken, the memory of such a device might have vanished entirely, recorded only in passing references like Cicero's mention of Archimedes' globe. Without the physical proof, no one would have believed that such precision could have been achieved so long ago. After the wreck was located, salvage operations continued for months. These working, without modern breathing equipment, braved the pressure and the cold, each descent a dangerous commitment. They recovered more than 30 marble statues and countless amphorae. The bronze device, however, came to the surface not in a single piece, but as a set of corroded masses, fused together by time. These lumps were brought to Athens, where the National Archaeological Museum began the patient work of cleaning and cataloging. In those early days, the fragments were not given special priority. Their surfaces were crusted with mineral accretions that disguised the fine detail beneath. It was only after careful scraping and examination that the first gear teeth were recognized, an observation that sparked decades of inquiry. Even now, as scientists reconstruct the mechanism's function, they must reckon with the reality that it came to us incomplete. X-rays and CT scans have revealed hidden components and inscriptions, but other parts are surely lost forever. The ship's final descent may have destroyed entire assemblies of gears or dials. What remains is enough to astonish, yet also a reminder that our knowledge is partial. From this shipwreck, scholars have also gleaned insight into the interconnectedness of the ancient world. The statues suggest workshops in Rhodes or Pergamon. The amphorae reveal trade connections reaching across the eastern Mediterranean. And the mechanism itself is evidence of a tradition of craftsmanship that transcended city and kingdom. Each artifact in the wreck bears silent testimony to the aspirations of the people who loaded the ship. The desire to acquire, to display, to measure, to understand. In this sense, the vessel was not only a carrier of goods, but a vessel for ideas, a floating archive of the age's ingenuity and ambition. In modern times, teams have returned to the wreck again and again. Using submersibles, robotic arms, and advanced imaging, they have mapped the debris field in ever greater detail. Each expedition uncovers new clues: a bronze disc here, a fragment of a hull there, a marble hand protruding from the sand. In 2017, divers discovered additional bronze pieces that may belong to the mechanism or to other unknown instruments. So, in one location, a couple hundred miles away, body parts turn up in sheets, with difficulty to discern what they are. Each find reinforces the sense that this ship was no ordinary freighter. It was, perhaps, a kind of moving treasury, a collection of wonders destined to impress some Roman patron. As these expeditions continue, so too does the larger project of situating the mechanism in its historical context. For while it is a marvel of engineering, it is also a product of its age, an era when Greek knowledge flourished under Roman rule, when scholars and craftsmen moved freely between cities, and when a wealthy elite invested in the tools of science and spectacle alike. The shipwreck at Antikythera is, in this way, more than the resting place of a remarkable device. It is a symbol of the precariousness by which history is transmitted. That a single storm could have deprived us of this glimpse into ancient minds is sobering. That the mechanism survived at all is a gift, one that compels us to listen carefully to the voices of the past. In the decades since the first divers surfaced with fragments in hand, those voices have grown louder. Through each discovery, each scan, and each scholarly debate, the mechanism continues to remind us how much can be achieved when knowledge, curiosity, and craftsmanship are allowed to flourish. Chapter 5. Gears like no others. The heart of the Antikythera mechanism lay in its gears, an assembly so sophisticated that even modern engineers were astonished when they first examined it. Though the device had suffered the ravages of centuries under the sea, enough remained to reveal the contours of an extraordinary technology. When the corroded fragments were first cleaned, conservators noticed tiny, regular teeth cut along the edges of bronze wheels. Some measured only a few centimeters across. Others were larger, their spokes carefully filed to reduce weight while retaining strength. All were crafted with a precision that seemed to belong more to an industrial age than to the ancient world. Historians were familiar with references to geared devices in Greek and Roman literature. Cicero, for instance, described a globe said to be the invention of Archimedes, capable of demonstrating the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. But no surviving example had ever come to light, until now. In the decades following the discovery, scholars set about documenting each fragment in detail. They mapped the teeth of each gear, counted their numbers, and sketched how the components might have meshed. From this painstaking analysis, a picture began to emerge of how the mechanism had worked. At its most basic, the device used the interaction of toothed wheels to track cycles in the heavens. As the wheels moved to the sun, they separated out the toothed wheels to track cycles in the heaven. A single turn of a hand crank would set the gears in motion, advancing pointers on dials that displayed information about the position of the sun and moon, the phases of the moon, and perhaps even eclipses and planetary movements. The precision required to fabricate such gears was no small feat. Each tooth had to be cut to the correct angle and spacing so that it would engage smoothly with its neighbors. Any error would compound as the wheels turned, throwing the calculations astray. That the mechanism's makers achieve such consistency without lathes or precision milling machines suggests a level of skill and patience that defies easy comparison. Scholars have argued over which workshops might have possessed such capabilities. Some believe Rhodes, long known as a center of learning and craftsmanship, was the most likely origin. Others point to Alexandria, where mathematicians and engineers thrived under the patronage of the Ptolemies. Regardless of where it was built, the mechanism's gears show that Greek artisans had mastered techniques of bronze working that would not be equaled in Europe for more than a millennium. Among the most remarkable discoveries was that the mechanism incorporated a form of differential gearing, two gears mounted on a single axis but rotating at different speeds. This arrangement allowed the device to model the moon's uneven motion across the sky, a phenomenon known today as the lunar anomaly. To modern observers, it is difficult to overstate how ingenious this was. Differential gearing is often associated with 19th century clockmakers or even the gearboxes of automobiles. Yet here it was, fully realized in the 2nd or 1st century BCE, hidden inside a bronze casing no larger than a shoebox. And yet, inside a bronze casing no larger than a shoebox, each gear carried more than mechanical purpose. Inscribed letters and numbers marked their relation to astronomical cycles. Some referenced the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period over which lunar phases repeat on the same dates, and the Saros cycle, which predicts the recurrence of eclipses. These were not casual references. They were the keys to unlocking the patterns of the sky. Reconstructing how all the gears work together has occupied generations of researchers. Derek de Sola Price, a physicist and historian, devoted years of his life to studying the fragments. In the 1970s, he published a groundbreaking analysis, proposing that the mechanism had at least 30 gears and functioned as an elaborate computer of time. His work inspired further study and, in time, more advanced imaging. In the early 21st century, new X-ray tomography scans revealed details no human eye could see: tiny inscriptions between the teeth, fine lines etched into the bronze surfaces, and even evidence of missing components. Each new revelation expanded the mechanism's known complexity. It was not merely a calendar or a model of the sun and moon, but something closer to a comprehensive instrument of celestial prediction. Its makers had anticipated the need to track multiple cycles simultaneously, layering gears upon gears in a choreography of motion. The mechanism's front dial likely displayed the zodiac, with a pointer indicating the sun's position. A second hand marked the lunar month. On the back, spiral dials recorded the Metonic and Saros cycles. Turning the main crank advanced all these displays in concert, allowing the user to see past and future dates of eclipses and other phenomena. The more scholars studied the gears, the clearer it became that the mechanism was as much a teaching tool as a scientific instrument. To own such a device was to possess not only knowledge, but a demonstration of it, proof of one's command of nature's rhythms. That the mechanism survived at all remains almost miraculous. Bronze was precious. Old instruments were often melted down and recast as weapons or coin. Only its entombment in a wreck spared it from the fate that claimed so many other wonders. Over time, replicas have been built, some using modern tools, others attempting to replicate ancient methods. Each effort has underscored how exacting the original workmanship must have been. A single misalignment of a pivot point, a single error in tooth spacing, would have rendered the entire mechanism unreliable. For modern engineers, this realization is humbling. They see in the mechanism not only the genius of design, but the discipline of execution. It is one thing to conceive of such an object in theory. It is quite another to bring it to life in metal. In studying the gears, historians have also reflected on what they reveal about Greek attitudes to science and technology. Where today we often draw a firm line between pure thought and practical skill, the mechanism demonstrates how seamlessly these domains could be woven together. It was both an embodiment of mathematical theory and a triumph of craftsmanship. This fusion of knowledge and technique, of inspiration and labor, is what makes the Antikythera Mechanism so compelling. Its gears are more than cogs and teeth. They are the evidence of a civilization's ambition to understand its place in the universe, and to do so with a precision that remains astonishing to this day. As we peer into its surviving fragments, we are reminded that the past is not a simple progression of ignorance to enlightenment. There were ages when understanding reached heights we are only now beginning to appreciate fully, and in the quiet turning of the mechanism's wheels, we glimpse how much was possible when knowledge and artistry moved in perfect synchrony. Early conservators removed much of it with simple tools, small picks, brushes, and the occasional acid bath, an approach that would horrify modern specialists. Fortunately, enough remained for scholars to piece together a substantial portion of the text. For decades, these letters were studied by magnifying glass and raking light. They were cataloged in careful drawings, each stroke of the stylus transcribed by hand. The process was painstaking. Many lines were partial or obscured by corrosion. Others were fragmented across multiple pieces that no one could be sure belonged together. Then, in the early 2000s, a collaboration between scientists and classicists introduced advanced imaging. Pony texture mapping, a technique that combines photographs taken under many angles, revealed faint characters invisible to the naked eye. For the first time, entire passages emerged from the darkness, as if the mechanism itself were finally ready to speak. What it revealed was remarkable. The inscriptions were not simply decoration or dedications. They were detailed instructions describing how to operate the device and what each dial represented. One passage explained how to set the main pointer to track the solar year, while another referred to the prediction of eclipses, listing their probable dates and characteristics. Some texts recorded astronomical cycles in terms familiar to ancient Greek astronomers: the Saros cycle of 223 lunations, the exeligmos of 669 lunations, and the Calippic cycle, an elaboration on the Metonic cycle that spanned 76 years. Each was carefully inscribed to guide the user's understanding of time's great patterns. More intriguing still were the references to planetary motion. Though much of this portion of the mechanism has been lost, traces of inscriptions hint that at least some dials may have tracked the wandering of the known planets. If true, this would place the Antikythera mechanism among the earliest devices capable of modeling not only the Sun and Moon, but the erratic dance of Mars, Jupiter, and Venus. Scholars debate exactly how much of the planetary system was included. Some argue that the surviving fragments do not conclusively show gearing for all 5 planets known to Greek astronomers. Others counter that the references in the inscriptions strongly imply a more comprehensive scope. The truth may lie in pieces still unrecovered from the wreck. Beyond instructions, the text also offered a glimpse of the intended audience. The language was precise but not esoteric. It assumed literacy and some familiarity with astronomical cycles, but not specialized training. This suggests that the mechanism may have been commissioned by a wealthy patron, someone interested in science and philosophy, but reliant on artisans to bring knowledge into material form. One fragment even bears what may have been a dedication or ownership mark. Though incomplete, it appears to reference an individual, perhaps the person who commissioned or owned the device. If so, the mechanism was as much a personal treasure as an educational tool. Among the most poetic of the inscriptions was a line describing the purpose of the eclipse dial. It read, in translation, "The moon in its course will darken the sun, a succinct declaration of nature's grand drama." To read such words across 2,000 years is to feel the immediacy of human curiosity, our timeless desire to chart what we cannot touch. The layout of the text suggests a deliberate effort to integrate explanation with experience. Each dial was accompanied by its own legend, a short inscription summarizing what the pointer revealed. In this way, the mechanism served not merely as a machine, but as an annotated model of the cosmos, guiding the user step by step. This combination of function and instruction is one reason scholars often call it the world's first known analog computer. Like a modern device, it contained both the capacity to calculate and the means to display those calculations in a way the user could understand. Yet the term computer only hints at the mechanism's deeper meaning. It was also an embodiment of philosophy. The Greeks did not see astronomy as separate from other branches of knowledge. Geometry, arithmetic, and cosmology were all expressions of a single impulse, to order the world through reason. The inscriptions are evidence of this impulse, rendered in bronze. In studying the texts, modern researchers have sometimes marveled at their concision. Space was limited, and every line had to convey maximum meaning with minimal words. This economy of expression, combined with clarity, demonstrates that the mechanism's makers were not merely technicians, but teachers. They understood how to communicate across time. Perhaps this is why, even in fragments, the inscriptions inspire such awe. They remind us that behind every artifact lies a human intention. Someone decided what to write, how to phrase it, and where to place it. Someone believed that understanding the heavens was worth the labor of casting gears, scribing letters, and polishing surfaces. In this sense, the mechanism is a conversation, a dialogue between the past and the present. The text is the voice of a vanished world, addressing us across centuries of loss. It tells us that even when empires fall and knowledge is buried, the impulse to explain endures. When the inscriptions were first translated in full, scholars realized that the Antikythera Mechanism was not merely an astronomical curiosity. It was a statement that the universe could be known, that its cycles could be measured, and that understanding was itself a form of reverence. Today, replicas of the mechanism sometimes carry facsimiles of those same inscriptions. Visitors to museums can turn a crank and watch pointers move across recreated dials, reading words first scratched into bronze before the birth of Christ. In that moment, they share in a lineage of curiosity stretching unbroken across 2 millennia. And perhaps this is the greatest achievement of the inscribed wisdom. It makes clear that the Antikythera Mechanism was never only about calculation. It was about connection, the link between observation and explanation, between maker and user, and ultimately between past and present. As long as we continue to read those delicate letters, the conversation endures. The mechanism still speaks, reminding us that time is not only something we measure, it is something we share. Chapter 7. The Mechanism's Silent Teachers. When scholars first began to study the Antikythera Mechanism in earnest, they soon recognized that understanding it required more than reading inscriptions and measuring gears. The device was so unique, so far ahead of what was expected for its time, that there was no single ancient text that described exactly how such a machine ought to be built. This absence forced researchers to look elsewhere for guidance, seeking clues from the wider landscape of Greek science and technology. Among the most influential sources were the surviving works of Hero of Alexandria, who lived a century or two after the mechanism was made. Hero wrote detailed treatises on mechanical devices, pulleys, automata, water clocks, that were used to illustrate principles of geometry and physics. While Hero never mentioned the Antikythera Mechanism by name, many of the concepts he described, especially the transmission of motion through gears, echoed the same mechanical logic. His writings gave researchers confidence that the knowledge needed to create the mechanism had existed in the Hellenistic world. Other ancient thinkers also became silent teachers for those studying the fragments, and also became silent teachers for those studying the fragment. Archimedes, whose reputation as a mathematician and engineer was legendary, was known to have designed geared models of the heavens. A story recorded by Cicero described a bronze sphere Archimedes had built that could demonstrate the movements of the sun, moon, and 5 known planets. Although no trace of that device survives, the account reinforced the idea that advanced gearwork was part of the intellectual heritage from which the Antikythera Mechanism emerged. Even more directly relevant were the astronomical tables of Hipparchus, a Greek astronomer working in Rhodes in the 2nd century BCE, close in time and place to when the mechanism is believed to have been constructed. Hipparchus made some of the most precise observations of the moon's motion ever recorded, including calculations of its varying speed across the sky. The lunar gear train inside the Antikythera Mechanism, which models these irregularities, seems to draw on his work. Scholars often cite this as evidence that the device was built in a sophisticated environment, where Hipparchus's discoveries were known and respected. Yet the ancient authors offered only partial glimpses. No single text described how to assemble dozens of bronze wheels into a compact machine. No diagram explained how the pins and slots in the mechanism's differential gears were to be laid out. To bridge this gap, researchers had to rely on their own capacity for reverse engineering. They became, in a sense, apprentices to long-dead craftsmen, learning by inference rather than instruction. The first such apprentices were Derek de Sola Price and Charalambos Karakalos, whose pioneering X-ray studies in the 1970s transformed understanding of the device's internal architecture. By peering inside the encrusted mass, they mapped gear positions that no eye had seen in 2,000 years. Price's subsequent monograph, Gears from the Greeks, argued that the mechanism represented not an isolated curiosity, but the culmination of a long mechanical tradition that had been largely forgotten. Later researchers built on Price's foundation, refining and sometimes challenging his interpretations. Michael Wright, a curator of mechanical engineering at the Science Museum in London, constructed detailed physical models based on his own radiographs. His work revealed additional gears and proposed new explanations for how the mechanism could track planetary motions. Each model was both an act of scholarship and a dialogue with the past, a way to test whether a particular configuration of teeth and wheels could replicate the cycles the inscriptions described. Allowed researchers to rotate virtual gears through thousands of iterations, adjusting tooth counts and spacing to see what arrangement best matched known astronomical cycles. These reconstructions often confirmed the astonishing accuracy of the ancient design. For example, the Metonic gear train, which predicted the 19-year cycle in which lunar and solar calendars align, proved correct within a fraction of a day over nearly 2 decades. As knowledge advanced, it became clear that understanding the mechanism was not simply about cataloging its parts. It was about reconstructing an entire worldview, one in which precision was possible without modern materials, and in which the heavens could be brought within reach by careful craftsmanship. Every gear was both a functional component and a philosophical statement, that nature's patterns could be rendered in metal. The silent teachers of antiquity continued to inspire this process. Ptolemy's Almagest, compiled in the 2nd century CE, recorded detailed planetary theories that, though later than the mechanism, offered context for its purpose. Ancient calendars, from Babylon to Athens, reminded researchers that prediction of eclipses was not merely academic. It served practical and religious needs, helping communities prepare for events that were seen as omens. These connections helped modern scholars see the mechanism not only as a scientific instrument, but as a cultural artifact, one embedded in the fabric of ancient life. Modern modelers often speak of a peculiar intimacy that grows from reconstructing the mechanism. To rebuild a gear train by hand, or to code its motion in a simulation, is to inhabit the mind of its creator. Every decision, how wide to make a wheel, how deep to cut a tooth, reflects an unseen craftsman's logic. In this way, each replica becomes a kind of conversation across centuries, a collaboration between modern curiosity and ancient ingenuity. Replicas now reside in museums and universities around the world. Some are functional, inviting visitors to turn a handle and watch dials move in concert. Others remain behind glass, their motion described in plaques and videos, yet all share a common purpose: to make visible the knowledge encoded in the original fragments. Perhaps the greatest lesson from these silent teachers is that no discovery stands alone. The Antikythera mechanism did not emerge from a void. It grew from generations of observation, calculation, and experimentation. Its gears were shaped not only by the hands of artisans, but by the ideas of philosophers, astronomers, and mathematicians, whose writings shaped the Greek understanding of the cosmos. To study mechanism, then, is to study a lineage of thought. It is to trace the long arc of human inquiry that stretches from the observation of a lunar eclipse to the carving of a bronze tooth. It is to recognize that knowledge, once born, can survive in hidden forms, etched in metal, buried beneath the sea, waiting to be read again. As the 21st century brings new imaging technologies and fresh interpretations, the mechanism remains both an object of fascination and a teacher without a voice. Its fragments, though silent, speak volumes. They remind us that the desire to measure and predict is as old as civilization itself, and they challenge us to consider what of our own knowledge might endure if, centuries from now, our works too lay in pieces on the ocean floor. For Greek astronomers, the moon was more than a bright ornament of the night. It was a timekeeper, a calendar in the heavens. Agricultural schedules were planned according to its phases, religious festivals marked its cycles, and seafarers used its light to guide their navigation. Any device that could reliably forecast the moon's position was a precious tool. Yet modeling the moon's apparent speed posed a unique challenge. Unlike the sun's more predictable motion, the moon moves faster or slower depending on where it is in its orbit, a consequence of its elliptical path around Earth. Hipparchus, working in the 2nd century BCE, had devised a mathematical model to describe this irregularity. He proposed that the moon's orbit was not centered perfectly on Earth but offset, a theory known as the eccentric model. This insight enabled more accurate predictions of the moon's position at any given time. The builders of the Antikythera Mechanism transformed this abstract idea into a material reality. Within the fragments raised from the shipwreck, researchers discovered a remarkable set of gears that embodied Hipparchus's lunar model. Central to this was a differential gearing arrangement, an innovation centuries ahead of its time. In a modern car, a differential allows wheels to turn at different speeds while sharing the same motion. Hipparchus. Inter-essence, connection, independent knowingness, and binding knowledge. In the mechanism, a similar principle was used to create the illusion of the moon's varying velocity. At the heart of the system was a pin-and-slot mechanism. As one gear rotated, a pin carried by its face traced a circular path inside a slot cut into another gear's arm. This movement translated the uniform motion of the driving gear into the uneven advance of the moon's pointer. When scholars first reconstructed this arrangement, they were astonished. Differential gearing was thought to have been invented in the Renaissance, yet here it was, in a device over 2 millennia old. The accuracy of this design is still striking. When tested in replicas, the lunar gear train produces a variation in speed that closely matches the observed anomaly, enough to predict the moon's position to within a degree over several years. This was not simply engineering for its own sake. It was a precise embodiment of theory, a demonstration that the cosmos could be rendered in bronze with astonishing fidelity. The moon pointer itself was likely mounted on the front dial, circling a graduated scale marked in zodiac signs. As the user turned the main drive, the pointer would rotate in uneven increments, reproducing the waxing and waning of lunar speed. At the same time, another dial tracked the synodic month, the cycle from new moon to new moon, by counting lunations against a 19-year metonic cycle. In this way, the mechanism united 2 complementary aspects of lunar motion: its changing position and its repeating phases. One of the most evocative details about this system is that it required extraordinary craftsmanship. The pin-and-slot mechanism had to be cut with precision, the slots shaped to exact tolerances so that the movement would not bind or slip. This level of care implies that the mechanism was produced in a workshop with advanced tools and specialized knowledge, perhaps in Rhodes, where Hipparchus himself had worked, or in another Hellenistic center of technology. When modern researchers first recognized the lunar anomaly gear train, they realized it was proof of an unbroken line of observation, theory, and engineering. The builders of the mechanism did not merely copy tables. They translated mathematical insight into a working model, making the abstract tangible. It was a union of thought and craftsmanship, a blending of philosophy and practice that remains rare even today. To understand the mechanism fully, scholars have spent years studying each gear's tooth count. The large driving wheel that powered the lunar train had 223 teeth, a number corresponding to the Saros cycle, the period over which eclipses repeat. This gear meshed with smaller wheels that reduced and transformed its motion. Each ratio was deliberate, chosen to embody a specific astronomical relationship. Yet, even with all this knowledge, questions remain. Some scholars believe additional gears were once attached to the mechanism, tracking further refinements in the moon's motion, or even the influence of the sun on lunar anomalies. Other fragments may still lie undiscovered on the seabed or lost to corrosion. The partial nature of the evidence ensures that debate continues, each generation of researchers adding a layer of interpretation. What no one disputes is that the lunar gear train is among the most sophisticated features of the entire device. It demonstrates that the mechanism was not simply a calendar or an eclipse predictor. It was an attempt to replicate the living sky in a machine, capturing the complexity of nature with astonishing fidelity. In the early 21st century, 3D imaging and high-resolution scans offered unprecedented views of these gears. Digital models allowed researchers to animate their motion, to see how the pin traced its path through the slot and drove the moon pointer forward. For the first time, a modern audience could watch the mechanism in operation, not as a static ruin, but as a working artifact. The experience is mesmerizing. Even in simulation, the graceful dance of the lunar gears evokes a sense of wonder, a reminder that knowledge is not only about utility, but about beauty. In 2015, the Mirror launched a new trial to test the new technology, an honest analytics of PT programs. The moon's place in the ancient imagination was both practical and poetic. It was a marker of time and a symbol of change. By reproducing its uneven path, the Antikythera Mechanism did more than solve a technical challenge. It captured the essence of the lunar cycle, the way it seems to hasten and slow, to wax and wane, to remain familiar, yet never quite the same. When visitors today stand before replicas in museums, they often linger at the lunar gear train. Some are drawn by the ingenuity of its design, others simply by the thought that 2,000 years ago, artisans could shape metal into a model of the sky. For scholars, the gears are a testament to the power of observation, the patient accumulation of knowledge, and the courage to imagine that the universe could be measured. In this respect, the Antikythera Mechanism is not only a relic, it is an argument in bronze, that human curiosity knows no limit, that even the most subtle motions of the heavens can be understood, and that understanding can be made visible. To trace the teeth of its gears is to follow the path of inquiry itself, a journey as winding as the lunar anomaly, yet driven by the same enduring impulse, to bring order to the night. Chapter 9. Calendars in Bronze. In the ancient world, time was measured not only by celestial motion, but also by the rhythms of human life, harvests and festivals, markets and treaties. The Antikythera Mechanism was built to connect these cycles, to reconcile the passage of days and months with the motions of the heavens. Among its many dials, none illustrates this ambition more clearly than the Metonic and Calippic calendars inscribed on its back face. The Metonic cycle was a period of 19 solar years, after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same dates of the solar calendar. This pattern had been recognized by the Babylonian astronomers and later confirmed by Meton of Athens around the 5th century BCE. It was an elegant solution to a perennial problem. The lunar month does not fit evenly into the solar year. 12 lunar months fall short of a full year, requiring periodic adjustments to keep the calendar in sync with the seasons. By counting 235 lunations in 19 years, the Metonic cycle offered a framework for managing this disparity. On the mechanism's lower back dial, the Metonic cycle was laid out in a spiral, divided into 5 concentric turns. Along this track were inscriptions marking each month and year. A small pointer, moved by the main drive gear, traced this spiral path as time advanced. With each rotation, it indicated the current year within the cycle and the phase of the moon. No surviving ancient instrument displays this cycle so vividly. Adjacent to the Metonic spiral was another dial marking the Calippic cycle, an innovation attributed to Callippus, who refined the Metonic scheme by subtracting a single day every 76 years. This correction improved the alignment of lunar months and solar years. On the mechanism, the Calippic cycle was tracked with a simple division into quadrants, each representing 19 years. As the pointer completed one revolution around this dial, 76 years would have passed. To imagine a user operating the mechanism, is to picture a person standing in front of the dials, turning the main crank and watching the indicators progress through decades of time. With each motion, the moon's position and phase updated, eclipses approached or receded, and the calendar's gears advanced. The device was not merely a display, but an interactive simulation of time itself. The inscriptions that accompany these dials are among the most valuable clues to the mechanism's purpose. They include month names, likely reflecting a variant of the Corinthian calendar, as well as numerical notations. These letters and numbers were painstakingly engraved by hand, each character no larger than a few millimeters tall. Despite centuries of corrosion, researchers have been able to reconstruct much of the text using surface imaging and digital enhancement. The precision of the engraving suggests a craftsman who was both literate and technically skilled. Every letter served a function, to guide the user through cycles that were otherwise invisible. For an ancient astronomer or calendar keeper, the mechanism would have been an authoritative reference, more reliable than memory or hand-copied tables. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Metonic dial is how seamlessly it integrated multiple concepts: lunar months, solar years, festival dates, into a coherent system. In a world where regional calendars differed and political authorities often manipulated timekeeping to their advantage, such a device represented a standard against which all reckonings could be measured. It offered not just knowledge, but order. In reconstructing this part of the mechanism, scholars faced the challenge of deciphering incomplete inscriptions. Many letters were obscured or missing altogether. Using parallels from contemporary texts and comparative analysis of calendar systems, researchers gradually filled in the gaps. Each discovery was like adding a piece to a puzzle whose full picture remained partly hidden. One inscription on the back of the device, labeled parapegma, listed star risings and settings, phenomena used to mark seasonal transitions. The inclusion of this information shows that the mechanism's designers intended it as a bridge between civil and astronomical time. Just as the Metonic dial reconciled the moon with the sun, the parapegma reconciled human schedules with the stars. Such efforts to align temporal frameworks were not merely academic. They had profound implications for agriculture, taxation, religious observance, and diplomacy. To predict the best moment to plant crops or to announce the start of a festival could mean prosperity or hardship for entire communities. The mechanism's calendars were thus instruments of practical governance as well as philosophical inquiry. Many scholars believe that the calendar dials would have been consulted in tandem with the eclipse prediction features. Together, they formed a complete temporal model: the Metonic cycle for ordinary months, the Saros cycle for eclipses, and the parapegma for the heliacal risings of bright stars. When combined with the lunar anomaly gear train, these systems allowed users to forecast with an accuracy unmatched in the ancient world. It is easy to imagine how such a device would have impressed any who beheld it. A visitor to a wealthy patron's study or a temple observatory might have stood transfixed as the pointer swept along the spiral track. Each turn of the handle was a miniature voyage through time. For a society accustomed to sundials and water clocks, the mechanism's multi-decade perspective must have seemed almost magical. Modern replicas built by horologists and engineers confirm that the Metonic dial operated with remarkable smoothness. When turned slowly, the pointer advances evenly through the months, faithfully tracking the passage of years. The tactile experience of moving the crank, feeling the resistance of the gears, and watching the indicator progress evokes a sense of connection to those who first conceived it. While the device cannot match the precision of contemporary atomic clocks, its underlying concept, the representation of celestial cycles in mechanical form, still inspires admiration. The Metonic dial stands as a testament to human ingenuity, the belief that the order of the heavens could be mirrored by the turning of wheels. It also reminds us that calendars are cultural artifacts, shaped by the needs and beliefs of those who create them. In the Antikythera Mechanism, the calendar was not a static table, but a dynamic process, a living model of time's flow. Each pointer, gear, and inscription told a story about how the Greeks understood their place in the cosmos. It's time, the thing that tells the story. In this respect, the mechanism is both a technological wonder and a philosophical statement. It embodies the conviction that time itself can be measured, known, and even anticipated. It affirms that through patient observation and careful reasoning, humanity can uncover the hidden patterns that govern the world. When researchers today study the Metonic dial, they do more than catalog teeth and notches. They glimpse a mindset that valued harmony between the heavens and the earth, between the predictable cycles of nature and the human need for certainty. That harmony, so elegantly expressed in bronze, continues to resonate across millennia. Chapter 10. The Language of Inscriptions. Long after the Antikythera Mechanism's gears ceased turning, the traces of its purpose remained etched in the fine inscriptions that lined its plates. If the gears were the device's muscles, the inscriptions were its voice, explaining, guiding, and contextualizing each motion. To study these tiny letters is to hear the faint echoes of the craftsmen and scholars who collaborated to build it. The inscriptions are spread across almost every visible surface. Some were carved in narrow bands around dials, others were squeezed into the tight spaces between mechanisms. They ranged from explanatory texts about cycles to simple labels identifying the function of a particular scale. All of them were executed with painstaking care, the characters uniform in size and style despite their minuscule dimensions. The front of the mechanism held inscriptions that corresponded to the zodiac dial and the Egyptian calendar scale. These texts explained how to interpret the positions of the sun and moon pointers. One section described the use of the lunar phase sphere, clarifying how the black and silver ball displayed waxing and waning. Another labeled the divisions of the ecliptic with the names of zodiac signs. Each line of text served a practical purpose to ensure the operator could read the device correctly without ambiguity. The back face contained the most extensive writing, arranged in columns adjacent to the spiral dials. Here, the inscriptions outlined the Metonic and Saros cycles in detail, describing their duration, mathematical basis, and significance. Some of these passages are little more than fragments, words severed by corrosion, letters lost to time. Yet enough remains to reconstruct the intellectual framework behind the mechanism's design. Scholars often remark that the language is as impressive as the engineering. The Greek text is clear, precise, and free of the flourishes found in literary inscriptions. Its tone is instructional, almost didactic, as if addressing an audience of educated users who required technical clarity rather than poetic imagery. This functional prose reveals much about the intended purpose of the mechanism. It was not a toy or a curiosity, but an instrument for serious study. One of the most intriguing inscriptions is known as the User's Manual, a set of directions explaining how to operate the various functions. In these lines, the maker describes how to turn the crank to display different phenomena: solar positions, lunar phases, eclipse predictions. It even instructs the user on interpreting the parapegma, the calendar of star risings and settings engraved nearby. This level of detail suggests that while the mechanism's owner was literate, they may not have been a professional astronomer. Instead, they were likely an educated patron or collector who required guidance in navigating such complexity. The manual also includes references to specific astronomical concepts: the anomaly of the moon, the 19-year Metonic cycle, and the 223-month Saros cycle. These ideas were well established by the time the mechanism was built, but their integration into a single device was unprecedented. By listing them in the inscriptions, the creator acknowledged their sources and contextualized their use. Each mention reflects a lineage of knowledge that extended from Babylonian skywatchers to Greek mathematicians. Deciphering these texts was no simple feat. Early researchers who examined the corroded fragments with the naked eye could read only scattered letters. It was not until the advent of advanced imaging, especially polynomial texture mapping and X-ray tomography, that the hidden writing emerged. These techniques allowed scholars to digitally flatten corroded surfaces and reveal faint impressions invisible to traditional photography. Letter by letter, word by word, the lost voice of the mechanism came back into focus. The process of transcription requires both patience and judgment. In many cases, scholars must compare fragmentary words to known astronomical terminology, reconstructing plausible readings based on context. Sometimes, more than one interpretation is possible. Even today, debates continue over the correct reconstruction of certain phrases. Yet, the broad outlines are clear enough to confirm that the mechanism functioned as a predictive calendar and an eclipse computer. Some inscriptions are purely descriptive, explaining how to interpret scales. Others hint at deeper philosophical ideas about the order of the cosmos. One text references the cycles of the divine luminaries, a phrase that connects the mechanism's function to the ancient belief that heavenly bodies influenced terrestrial events. This link between science and spirituality was typical of the Hellenistic world, where astronomy and astrology often blurred together. The surviving fragments also reveal the use of abbreviations and specialized symbols. Greek letters served as numerals, marking subdivisions of time or degrees along the zodiac. Tiny symbols indicated lunar nodes or eclipse points. These shorthand notations compressed complex ideas into a compact visual code, a necessity given the limited space available. To modern eyes, the result resembles a hybrid of technical diagram and textual annotation. Equally fascinating are the traces of mistakes and corrections. In Principles of Chemistry, Mathematics, and Economics, in some places the engraver appears to have started a word, realized an error, and carefully re-engraved the correct text alongside it. These small human imperfections remind us that the mechanism, however sophisticated, was made by hand. Each inscription reflects hours of concentrated labor, a craftsman hunched over the bronze plates with a stylus and a chisel, aware that any slip might compromise the clarity of the message. Historians have debated whether the text was written by a single hand or several. The consistency of the letter form suggests that one skilled artisan may have engraved the majority of the inscriptions, possibly under the supervision of a scholar who dictated the content. This collaboration between technical and intellectual labor is emblematic of the wider culture that produced the mechanism. A world where craftsmen and philosophers worked side by side. The clarity of the language and the precision of the lettering reinforced the impression that the mechanism was intended to endure. It was designed not only to function, but to instruct, preserving knowledge across generations. Even as corrosion slowly overtook the metal, the words remained, waiting for a future age to recover them. For modern researchers, reading these inscriptions is an act of connection across 2 millennia. Each deciphered word narrows the distance between our time and theirs, between contemporary curiosity and ancient intention. Through this textual bridge, we learn not only how the mechanism worked, but why it was valued. Inscriptions have always been a way to claim permanence against the transience of the world. Whether carved on stone monuments or etched in delicate bronze, they proclaim that someone once cared enough to record what mattered. In the Antikythera Mechanism, this impulse takes on a special resonance. Here was a machine built to model the impermanence of time itself, yet anchored by the permanence of language. When the last line of text was engraved, the device was ready to fulfill its purpose. Its dials, gears, and indicators became a mechanical embodiment of the words that described them. It was, in every sense, a book in bronze, a narrative of the heavens written not with ink and parchment, but with wheels and cogs. As we turn its reconstructed crank today, watching the pointers advance, we are also turning the pages of that ancient book. Each rotation reveals not only a new position of the stars, but a new chapter in humanity's effort to understand the cosmos. And at the heart of this endeavor lies the quiet power of language. The ability to speak across centuries, to preserve ideas in fragile symbols, and to remind us that knowledge endures when it is carefully inscribed. Chapter 11. The eclipses foretold among the many marvels of the Antikythera Mechanism, few inspired as much wonder as its ability to forecast eclipses. Even in the modern world, an eclipse still evokes a sense of awe, an unsettling reminder that the skies are not fixed, that shadows can consume the sun or moon without warning. For the ancients, these events carried even greater weight, woven into the language of omens and portents. That a single device could anticipate such celestial spectacles was a triumph of Hellenistic ingenuity. The back of the mechanism held the secret to this predictive power. Two large spiral dials occupied the main face, each representing a different but related cycle. The upper dial tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period that nearly aligned lunar months with solar years. Below it lay the Saros dial, whose 223 lunar months defined the interval after which the pattern of eclipses would repeat. The Saros cycle was well known to Babylonian astronomers centuries before the mechanism's construction. It had been observed that if one counted precisely 223 synodic months, meaning cycles from new moon to new moon, the circumstances of an eclipse would recur. This discovery was not a matter of idle curiosity. In a world where eclipses were thought to herald changes in fortune or divine displeasure, predicting them had profound cultural and political value. Translating this cycle into a mechanical form was no simple matter. The makers of the mechanism devised a spiral track that could display all 223 months. A small pointer advanced around this track, indicating the current month in the cycle. Along the spiral were glyphs and inscriptions marking months in which eclipses were likely to occur. Some months bore a small H symbol for Helio, signifying a solar eclipse, while others displayed an S for Selene, denoting a lunar eclipse. An essence of sound declimped. By observing the position of the pointer, the user could anticipate not only when eclipses might happen, but also their general characteristics, whether the event would occur near perigee, when the moon appeared largest, or near apogee, when it was smallest and dimmer. This level of detail suggests that the mechanism's creator understood both the regularity and subtle variability of eclipses. No longer were such occurrences unpredictable, they became elements of a knowable pattern. Some scholars have speculated that the mechanism's inscriptions included additional information about the visibility of eclipses in the Mediterranean region, though the evidence remains fragmentary. What is clear is that the dial provided more than a simple list of dates. It offered a dynamic illustration of cycles interlocking in complex harmony. By linking the Saros cycle to the Metonic and Calippic cycles, the mechanism integrated the prediction of eclipses into a broader framework of celestial timekeeping. This achievement would have impressed any learned observer who beheld the device. The capacity to forecast an eclipse months or years in advance was a demonstration of the power of reason to pierce the veil of mystery. It proclaimed that the heavens were not the realm of chaos, but of order, an order that could be measured, modeled, and ultimately understood. Yet the practical uses of such predictions also mattered. In ancient societies, the ability to announce an eclipse could elevate the standing of rulers or scholars. Those who could forewarn the community of a darkening sky might be seen as possessing privileged knowledge or divine favor. The mechanism's user therefore held a kind of authority grounded not in superstition, but in empirical observation encoded in bronze. The aesthetic aspect of the Saros dial should not be overlooked. To modern eyes, it resembles a finely wrought calendar, its divisions carefully proportioned, its inscriptions elegant despite their diminutive scale. The spiral form itself was a visual metaphor for recurrence, time unfolding in loops rather than lines. Each revolution of the pointer was a silent promise that the cosmic dance would continue, that eclipses would always return in their appointed season. When the mechanism was first recovered from the Antikythera wreck, the significance of these dials was not immediately understood. The fragments appeared to be little more than corroded plates, pitted and fractured by centuries underwater. Only through the patient work of researchers, matching gear counts, reconstructing inscriptions, analyzing the geometry of the spirals, did the meaning of the Saros dial emerge. In a sense, the rediscovery of this function mirrored the very process it described: cycles forgotten and then renewed. One of the most evocative details of the Saros dial is the small subsidiary pointer attached to the main hand. As the principal pointer advanced along the spiral, the secondary pointer rotated in synchrony, indicating the node, the point where the moon's orbit crossed the plane of the ecliptic. Eclipses could occur only near these nodes, making their tracking essential for accurate prediction. This ingenious feature demonstrates how the mechanism combined astronomical insight with mechanical subtlety. To appreciate the full sophistication of the mechanism's eclipse prediction, it is helpful to consider what it replaced. Before such devices, forecasting eclipses required complex tables and skilled interpreters who understood how to correlate multiple cycles. The mechanism condensed this knowledge into a single, integrated display. With a turn of the crank, the user could see the passage of years, the recurrence of lunar months, and the rhythm of eclipses, all unified within the same instrument. Inscriptions near the Saros spiral include references to the times of day when eclipses might begin. Further evidence that the mechanism's creator intended it to be more than a symbolic model. It was a practical tool, a guide for observers who wish to prepare for these striking events. Even today, the precision of its predictions compares favorably with much later European efforts. While no complete list of its predicted eclipses survives, the mechanism's general accuracy can be inferred from the cycles it encoded. A Saros cycle of 223 months is about 18 years and 11 days, so precise that successive eclipses would occur not only on nearly the same date, but at nearly the same hour. This level of predictability remains one of the most astonishing aspects of ancient astronomy. Some have speculated that the mechanism's eclipse forecasting was connected to ritual or calendrical observance, perhaps enabling priests or magistrates to time ceremonies in harmony with celestial portents. Others see it as part of a broader philosophical project, the demonstration that the cosmos obeyed rational principles that could be expressed in mechanical form. Whatever its purpose, the mechanism Saros dial stands as a testament to the intersection of practical utility and profound wonder. When the pointer reached the end of the spiral track, it did not simply stop. Instead, the user could reset it to the starting position, initiating a new cycle. This simple act of winding the pointer back to the beginning carried symbolic significance. Time was not a river flowing only forward, but a wheel, its patterns eternally returning. Each revolution of the Saros dial reaffirmed the belief that, though the heavens might change, their changes were comprehensible. In this way, the mechanism offered a different vision of fate than the fatalistic philosophies that sometimes overshadowed ancient thought. It suggested that while human life was transient, the motions of the cosmos were fixed in their beauty and predictability. To know the time of an eclipse was to glimpse the deeper structure of existence, to see beyond the immediate fears and superstitions to the underlying mathematics of the world. The prediction of eclipses was thus more than a technical feat. It was an emblem of the aspirations of Greek science, to unite observation and reason, to create instruments that could distill the sky's vast complexity into a form grasped by human hands. Even now, as we reconstruct the Saros dial in virtual models, we are reenacting that same act of curiosity, turning the wheel, watching the shadows, and listening for the silent logic of the heavens. Chapter 12. The Craft of the Gears. To most observers, the first glimpse of the Antikythera Mechanism's internal gearing feels almost impossible. Tiny bronze teeth interlock in precise ratios, some wheels just millimeters thick. Each gear is an argument against the assumption that such complexity belongs solely to modern machines. But to the artisans who made them, these components were the natural product of generations of craftsmanship, evolving alongside scientific ambition. The mechanism contains more than 30 gears, though the exact count remains debated because of missing pieces. Their arrangement is astonishingly sophisticated. Each gear had to be cut by hand, its teeth shaped so they would engage smoothly with its neighbors. A single error in spacing or angle could cripple the function of the entire assembly. Yet the surviving fragments show a standard of manufacture that rivals later European clocks. The largest gear, often called the main driving wheel, carried 223 teeth, corresponding to the Saros cycle of eclipse prediction. Its circumference had to be perfectly true, or the motion of the pointer would drift out of sync over months and years. Other gears were smaller but equally demanding to produce, with tooth counts such as 53, 19, or 127. Numbers carefully chosen to embody astronomical ratios. How the craftsmen of ancient Greece developed such precision remains partly a mystery. Bronze casting was a well-established art by the time of the mechanistic, but casting a gear blank was only the beginning. The teeth themselves were likely cut by hand using small chisels or files. Some researchers believe specialized templates or jigs were employed to maintain consistency. The slightest inconsistency would compound, as gear after gear transferred motion through the train. The gear's function was to translate a single rotational input, turning the crank, into multiple, simultaneous motions. Each pointer advanced at a different rate, corresponding to cycles of the moon, sun, and planets. This coordination required that the makers not only shape each wheel, but calculate the ideal gear ratios in advance. Even in our era of computer-aided design, such a project would be challenging. In the 2nd or 1st century BCE, it was simply unprecedented. One of the most famous features of the mechanism's gearing is the epicyclic or planetary arrangement, sometimes called a differential. Unlike a simple train where gears mesh in a linear sequence, an epicyclic assembly uses gears mounted on arms that themselves revolve. This allows the mechanism to model irregular motions, such as the moon's variable speed across the sky, what ancient astronomers called its anomaly. In modern engineering, differentials are essential in applications like automobiles, where wheels must turn at different speeds around corners. That this principle appeared in a Greek device centuries before the first mechanical clocks astonishes historians of technology. The discovery suggested that the mechanism's makers not only understood theoretical astronomy, but also invented solutions that would not be reinvented in Europe for over a millennium. The moon's anomaly gear train is a case study in this brilliance. The system combined a 53-tooth gear and a pin and slot mechanism to create a motion that accelerates and decelerates the moon pointer as it orbits the dial. This effect mirrored the moon's apparent speed, which varies due to the elliptical shape of its path around Earth. No other surviving artifact from antiquity shows such an application of epicyclic gearing. Building this assembly required more than theoretical knowledge. The craftsman had to cut the slot with uniform width so the pin could slide without binding. The gears had to remain perfectly concentric to avoid introducing errors. Bronze, though durable, could deform slightly if not handled carefully, so the entire frame needed to support the gearing with rigid precision. Even in their current corroded state, the gear teeth display remarkable consistency. Under magnification, their profiles show similar angles and depths, a testament to the use of standardized cutting tools, or perhaps master patterns. The delicate balance of friction and freedom in each gear's motion speaks to an intimate familiarity with the behavior of bronze. What tools did the artisans employ? No workshop has ever been found containing molds or gear templates that can be definitively linked to the mechanism. Yet parallels in other bronze work, statues, coin dies, and delicate surgical instruments suggest a culture where fine metalworking was highly developed. Files, chisels, abrasives, and possibly bow drills would have been among the likely tools. Every tooth had to be checked and adjusted until it meshed smoothly. While much attention has focused on the largest and most complex gears, even the smaller wheels were feats of craftsmanship. Some measured less than 2 centimeters across, yet had dozens of perfectly cut teeth. These smaller gears enabled subtle adjustments in speed, necessary for coordinating the multiple astronomical cycles. The entire assembly was enclosed in a wooden case, protecting the mechanism from dust and damage, though over time the protective casing decayed. Equally impressive, is how the gear train integrated cycles with different lengths and mathematical properties. The Metonic cycle, 19 solar years, and the Saros cycle, 223 lunar months, are not harmonically related. To display them together without losing accuracy required ingenious compromises in the gearing, and the choice of specific prime-numbered gear counts was essential to avoid cumulative error. The discovery of the Antikythera Mechanism rewrote the history of mechanical technology. Before its recovery, historians believed that such gearing did not appear until the medieval period, when European clockmakers began to build astronomical clocks. The mechanism demonstrated that Greek engineers possessed not only the theory of planetary motion, but also the technical ability to embody that theory in metal. Over the years, replicas have been constructed to test hypotheses about its operation. These reconstructions confirm that the gearwork can, in fact, perform as the ancient texts suggest. When the crank is turned, the gears advance in a precisely coordinated ballet. The moon pointer accelerates and decelerates, the eclipse prediction dial progresses, and the Metonic calendar tracks the years. Each movement emerges naturally from the relationships encoded in the gear ratios. To reconstruct the gearing from corroded fragments required extraordinary detective work. Researchers compared the number of teeth on each gear fragment, then extrapolated which cycles the counts could represent. By analyzing wear marks and pivot holes in the plates, they inferred the positions of missing wheels. X-ray tomography helped identify hidden outlines where corrosion had obscured the teeth. This process is a reminder that the mechanism is not just an ancient artifact, but a challenge to our understanding of history. It demands we reconsider what was possible in the Hellenistic world. The familiar narrative of technological progress, a slow ascent from primitive tools to complex machines, becomes more complicated in the face of such evidence. The Antikythera Mechanism's gears are more than mechanical components. They are expressions of a worldview in which nature could be measured, modeled, and predicted. They show that the same drive to decode the universe that inspires modern scientists once inspired Greek craftsmen to pick up their chisels and files, confident that the sky's secrets could be rendered in bronze. Even today, as replicas spin beneath glass cases in museums, visitors often fall silent, watching the gears move. There is something about their motion, so precise, so elegant, that defies simple explanation. It is a reminder that the most extraordinary ideas often emerge not only from abstract theory, but from the quiet patience of skilled hands, cutting, shaping, and fitting, until knowledge takes material form. In the next chapter, we will turn from the mechanics to the question of where the mechanism came from, who commissioned it, who built it, and why such an extraordinary device was lost to the sea. Chapter 13. The makers and their world, even as modern researchers pieced together how the Antikythera mechanism worked, a deeper question remained. Who conceived such an astonishing device, and what kind of society produced it? To answer this, scholars have sifted through fragmentary records, studied ancient scientific texts, and compared the mechanism to other artifacts. Though the details remain debated, the evidence points to a vibrant Hellenistic world where the boundaries between philosophy, science, and craft were remarkably fluid. The prevailing view is that the mechanism was built in the Greek-speaking Eastern Mediterranean sometime between 150 and 100 BCE. Some argue for an earlier date closer to the time of Archimedes, others for a slightly later period around the 1st century BCE. Regardless, the consensus is that it emerged during the era when Rhodes and Alexandria were intellectual powerhouses. Rhodes, an island in the Aegean, was renowned for its schools of astronomy and engineering. It was also a hub for skilled bronze workers who produced statues, scientific instruments, and mechanical devices. The astronomer Hipparchus, active there in the 2nd century BCE, made crucial discoveries about the motions of the sun and moon, including the phenomenon of lunar anomaly. His work is so closely aligned with the lunar gearing of the Antikythera mechanism that some scholars speculate he may have directly inspired or even contributed to its design. Alexandria, with its famous library and museum, was another likely source of influence. There, mathematicians like Apollinaris and astronomers like Eratosthenes pursued research that combined geometry with observation. In such settings, practical mechanics and theoretical inquiry were not seen as separate pursuits. A device that could model celestial cycles would have been both a scientific instrument and a demonstration of philosophical ideas about order in the cosmos. While no ancient author explicitly describes the mechanism itself, texts from around the same period hint that geared devices for astronomy were known. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BCE, mentions a sphere made by Archimedes that could reproduce the motions of the sun, moon, and 5 planets. Other references describe rotating globes and orreries displayed as teaching tools. Though these descriptions lack the detail to confirm exact parallels, they suggest that sophisticated mechanisms were part of the intellectual landscape. Yet the Antikythera mechanism was unique in several respects. Unlike a globe showing the heavens, it was a compact box with multiple dials, designed for portability and regular use. Its inscriptions provided instructions for setting and interpreting the displays, implying that the owner was expected to operate it independently. It was both a calendar and a predictive tool, an object that turned complex calculations into something a learned layperson could grasp. Who commissioned such a wonder? The shipwreck that preserved it offers some clues. The wreck's cargo included luxury goods, bronze and marble statues, fine glassware, and decorative items intended for wealthy patrons. This suggests the mechanism was likely part of a shipment destined for an elite household, or possibly a ruler. Owning a device that embodied the latest astronomical knowledge would have been a mark of status, demonstrating both wealth and cultural refinement. One theory proposes that the mechanism was a diplomatic gift or tribute, perhaps intended for a Roman statesman or military commander. Around the time of the wreck, Rome's influence was expanding into the Greek world, and it was common to send lavish gifts to Roman patrons. A device capable of predicting eclipses and tracking festivals would have impressed any educated Roman familiar with Greek science. Alternatively, the mechanism may have belonged to a wealthy Greek who commissioned it from a workshop in Rhodes or Alexandria. Such patrons often sponsored public works, temples, and scientific research. Possessing an astronomical calculator would have been a way to display one's learning and piety, since understanding celestial cycles was intertwined with religious observance. While the identity of the original owner remains a mystery, the device itself reveals much about the people who built it. It testifies to a culture where artisans could read astronomical tables, understand complex ratios, and translate them into precise mechanical designs. The same workshops that produced statues and instruments also made devices that, in their own way, aspired to capture the order of the heavens. Epigraphic evidence, especially the inscriptions on the mechanism's plates, reinforces this impression. The writing is Greek, in a script consistent with the late Hellenistic period. The language is technical, but not obscure, suggesting the text was meant to be understood by an educated user rather than a specialist alone. Instructions specify how to set the dials, interpret the eclipse predictions, and adjust for local calendars. This combination of accessibility and sophistication is a hallmark of Hellenistic science. Further evidence comes from the wreck itself. The statues and luxury goods were likely looted or purchased from Greek cities, part of the steady flow of art and culture westward. This trade network not only moved objects, but ideas, spreading Greek astronomical and mathematical knowledge across the Mediterranean. It is possible that workshops in Rhodes, Alexandria, or elsewhere collaborated on such commissions, pooling expertise in design, casting, and engraving. Archaeologists have found other hints of similar mechanisms, though none as elaborate as the Antikythera device. Small geared components have turned up in later Roman sites, and references to geared sundials and calendars appear sporadically in literature. Yet nothing matches the mechanism's integration of functions. In that sense, it remains a singular artifact, proof of a level of mechanical ambition and achievement that would not be equaled for over 1,000 years. The people who built it were heirs to a long tradition of inquiry, stretching back to the Babylonians and Egyptians. They combined empirical observation, tracking eclipses, noting solstice dates, with mathematical abstraction, and they found in bronze a medium that could embody their understanding in lasting form. The mechanism also reflects the Hellenistic fascination with automata, machines that mimicked natural processes. From singing birds to hydraulic clocks, Greek engineers delighted in crafting devices that blurred the line between nature and artifice. The Antikythera Mechanism is perhaps the most profound example, a machine that rendered the sky's invisible laws into something you could hold in your hands. Centuries later, as knowledge of such devices faded, the mechanism sank into legend. Medieval scholars inherited Greek astronomy in textual form, but lost the technological context that made such a machine possible. Only in the Renaissance did gears and mechanical models begin to reappear in Europe, eventually leading to the age of clocks and orreries. Even then, it would take until the 20th century for scholars to realize that the Greeks had anticipated these developments so fully. In many ways, the Antikythera Mechanism is a mirror reflecting both the brilliance and the fragility of ancient knowledge. It shows how scientific understanding, when linked to craftsmanship and patronage, can achieve wonders. Yet it also reminds us how easily such knowledge can vanish, leaving only fragments to puzzle over. As we follow the story into the final chapters, we will look at how modern technology, X-ray tomography, 3D modeling, and digital reconstruction has helped restore the mechanism's lost voices. And we will consider what this artifact still teaches us about curiosity, ambition, and the enduring desire to measure our place in the cosmos. The breakthrough came not through excavation, but through imaging. In the early 2000s, a team of scientists and engineers from multiple countries joined forces to study the mechanism using advanced scanning techniques. The project was led by the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, AMRP, which brought together experts in physics, astronomy, epigraphy, computer modeling, and mechanical engineering. The most transformative tool was a high-resolution X-ray tomography system developed by X-Tech Systems, known as the Blade Runner. This machine allowed the team to peer inside the densely encrusted bronze fragments, revealing internal structures that had been hidden since antiquity. Unlike conventional X-rays, which produce flat images, tomography creates layered slices, building a full three-dimensional image from within the object. It was like reading a book without opening its cover. As the internal gearwork came into view, researchers could identify the sizes, positions, and tooth counts of individual gears with unprecedented clarity. This information was crucial to reconstructing how the mechanism worked. Each gear's teeth interacted with another in a delicate cascade of ratios, many corresponding to known astronomical cycles. Simultaneously, another imaging technique, reflectance transformation imaging, RTI, was used to illuminate the faint surface inscriptions etched on the bronze plates. RTI allowed the team to capture the way light reflected off the surface from different angles, revealing scratches and engraved letters almost invisible to the naked eye. With this method, they uncovered more than 3,000 characters of ancient Greek, many of them legible for the first time. These inscriptions proved to be a kind of manual, not poetic or symbolic, but practical and specific. They described how to operate the device, what the dials displayed, and which astronomical events it could predict. The texts even mentioned the cycles used to calculate eclipses, confirming what earlier researchers had suspected but could not prove. Together, the scans and inscriptions allowed scholars to piece together a more complete model of the mechanism than ever before. They confirmed the presence of the 223-month Saros cycle used to predict eclipses, as well as the Metonic cycle, which reconciled lunar and solar calendars. The device tracked both celestial and civic time, aligning the heavens with human festivals and agricultural rhythms. Most astonishing was the revelation that the front of the device likely included pointers for the 5 known planets of antiquity: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. In marking, their motions were modeled using epicyclic gearing, a sophisticated arrangement of nested gears that replicated the apparent retrograde motion of the planets as seen from Earth. This level of complexity had previously been assumed impossible for the ancient world. Reconstructing these planetary displays required more than historical knowledge. And so, while we were on Earth during the Vatican, Earth was exhibiting similar phenomena to those in the movie that filled the heart of Eliot. The researchers had to reverse engineer the principles of ancient Greek astronomy, especially the mathematical models of planetary motion, proposed by philosophers like Ptolemy and Hipparchus. They then tested whether such models could be translated into gear trains, using only technology available at the time. It turned out they could, using nothing more than bronze plates, hand tools, and deep mathematical understanding. The mechanism's creators had achieved what amounted to a mechanical computer. The machine did not just represent time, it calculated it. To help visualize their findings, the team built physical and digital reconstructions of the device. Some used traditional methods, casting bronze parts and assembling them by hand. Others created virtual models using CAD software, animating the gears to show how the device would have looked and functioned in its prime. These models brought the ancient mechanism to life, revealing the slow, graceful dance of gears moving in concert to mark lunar phases, eclipses, and planetary conjunctions. But as the mechanism came into clearer focus, it also raised new questions. Why were no other examples ever found? Was this the product of a lone genius, or the result of a broader tradition of mechanical design now lost to history? Was it a teaching tool, a temple offering, a scientific calculator, or all of these at once? Some scholars suggested that similar devices may once have existed but were destroyed over time, melted down for bronze, broken in wars, or simply forgotten as scientific traditions shifted. Others pointed to scattered literary references to orreries and geared globes as evidence of a larger, now vanished lineage of mechanical modeling. Still others proposed that the mechanism was a one-of-a-calc masterpiece, made by a small circle of artisans who possessed both the theoretical knowledge and the mechanical skill to execute such a design. If so, it would resemble the rarest kind of invention, a convergence of disciplines that occurred only once and left behind a single, silent testimony. Whatever its origins, the Antikythera Mechanism had survived long enough to be reborn in the digital age. Museums now display reconstructions alongside the original fragments, while online platforms allow visitors to explore the device interactively. The machine has inspired artists, engineers, and even science fiction writers. It has become a symbol of lost ingenuity, a reminder that the ancients were not merely dreamers gazing at the stars, but builders who sought to capture the heavens in gear and bronze. The Antikythera Mechanism also continues to influence modern science. Its study has helped refine imaging technologies, encouraged interdisciplinary collaboration, and inspired new approaches to the history of technology. It challenges modern assumptions about what ancient people could achieve, and reminds us that intellectual revolutions are not the exclusive property of the modern era. Yet, for all the advances, the mechanism remains in some ways an enigma. There are gaps in the record, missing fragments, unreadable inscriptions, and unresolved functions. Its exact use and ownership remain speculative. Even the full extent of its capabilities is still under investigation. But perhaps that is part of its enduring allure. The mechanism bridges two worlds, the ancient and the modern, the known and the mysterious. It is a conversation across centuries between the builders who once aligned their gears with the skies and the scholars who now read their work through a veil of time and rust. As we prepare to draw this story to a close in the final chapter, we will step back and consider the broader meaning of this extraordinary device. What does it tell us about the people who made it, the cosmos they imagined, and the long arc of curiosity that binds us to them still? Chapter 15, The Machine and the Stars. On quiet nights in ancient Greece, before the invention of telescopes or the clock, people tilted their heads back and read the sky. They saw not just stars, but signals, markers of seasons, signs from the gods, promises of order in an often chaotic world. And somewhere, perhaps on the island of Rhodes or in a workshop in Pergamon, a group of minds came together to transform those distant points of light into something tangible. They made a machine that could predict the movements of the heavens, not by magic or divine fiat, but by mechanical logic. It would become the most mysterious scientific artifact of the ancient world. As scholars now understand, the Antikythera Mechanism was not simply a calendar or an astronomical calculator. It was a physical model of time itself, built to mirror the cycles of the sun, moon, and planets with stunning accuracy. The device did not measure the present, it anticipated the future. With a turn of the hand, it could show the date of the next eclipse, the phase of the moon on a given festival, or the alignment of celestial bodies in the sky on any day for years to come. The level of abstraction this required was immense. The creators had to take what they observed, retrograde motion, irregular lunar speeds, varying eclipse shadows, and reduce it to ratios, gears, and hands that turned on copper dials. They modeled not just time but complexity, and in doing so they revealed how deeply the ancient world was willing to merge philosophy, craftsmanship, and empirical observation. The rear face of the mechanism, which housed the eclipse prediction dials, was one of its most ambitious components. It featured a spiral dial divided into 223 months, the length of the Saros cycle, after which lunar and solar eclipses repeat. Additional inscriptions used glyphs to indicate the kind of eclipse expected, whether lunar or solar, and even whether it would be visible in the Greek-speaking world. It also tracked the exeligmos cycle, a refinement of the Saros, which allowed for greater precision in timing repeated eclipses. For a people without mechanical clocks, this was as close to celestial forecasting as the ancient world would come. Equally impressive was the metonic dial, which reconciled lunar and solar calendars. The Greek calendar was lunisolar, meaning that it tried to match the phases of the moon with the length of the solar year. But the two cycles don't align neatly. A solar year is about 365.24 days. A lunar month is around 29.5 days. Over time, the two fall out of step, but every 19 years, a period known as the metonic cycle, the two align closely again. The Antikythera Mechanism modeled this, allowing its users to predict when festivals, harvests, and other events would occur across generations. Even more astounding, recent research suggests that the front face may have included planetary pointers that used complex gear trains to reflect the apparent motion of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. It's a far more complicated and much more complex cycle than the Liebesverse. These planets were known to ancient astronomers and observed to behave irregularly, moving backward, retrograde at times, then forward again. The Antikythera Mechanism accounted for this by employing epicyclic gearing, a method described in Greek astronomy texts and replicated mechanically with elegance. It's difficult to overstate what this meant. The builders had to know the orbital periods of the planets, model them mathematically, and then engineer bronze gears with the correct number of teeth to produce the right motion. These weren't decorative features. They were functional expressions of astronomical theory. More than a millennium would pass before mechanical devices of similar complexity would emerge in Europe. The first geared clocks appeared in the 14th century, and they lacked the predictive astronomical functions of the Antikythera Mechanism. In many ways, the ancient machine was not merely ahead of its time. It was from another timeline entirely. So why was it made? Historians continue to debate this. One theory holds that it was a teaching tool, perhaps used in a philosophical school to demonstrate celestial mechanics. Others think it may have been a demonstration piece designed to impress elite patrons or accompany scholarly texts. Some suggest it was used to calculate the timing of athletic festivals like the Olympics, which were scheduled based on lunar cycles. But whatever its immediate use, the broader purpose of the mechanism was clear: to understand the heavens by mechanical means. It was a tool of control, not in the sense of dominating nature, but of mastering its rhythms. In a world vulnerable to droughts, eclipses, and omens, the ability to predict celestial events was more than scholarly. It was deeply human, and then it was lost. The ship that carried the Antikythera Mechanism, possibly en route from Rhodes to Rome, sank off the coast of the small island of Antikythera around 60 BCE. Along with it went a cargo of marble statues, fine glassware, and other luxuries bound for the Roman elite. The mechanism sank into obscurity with them, preserved only by chance and seawater. It would not be until 1901 that sponge divers recovered the first fragments, and another century before scholars began to grasp the full meaning of what they had found. What followed was one of the most remarkable detective stories in the history of science, a piecing together of fragments, inscriptions, and ideas that crossed centuries. In reconstructing the Antikythera Mechanism, modern researchers did more than revive a lost object. They reconnected with a way of thinking. The device represents an era when knowledge was holistic, when the divide between science, art, and philosophy was blurred. It shows that ancient minds were capable of extraordinary innovation, not through computers or satellites, but with gears, patience, and vision. The story of the Antikythera Mechanism is not just about technology. It is about memory, how knowledge can be built, forgotten, and found again. It's about humility in the face of ancient brilliance, and it's about the timeless desire to make sense of the sky above us. As you close your eyes tonight and think of the stars, imagine the quiet click of bronze teeth turning beneath a dial, the gentle movement of a hand across a face marked with lunar glyphs. Somewhere, once, someone turned that crank and waited, and the machine answered, not with words, but with time itself. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, as we traced the delicate bronze gears and the brilliant minds behind the Antikythera Mechanism. In its fragments, we glimpsed a civilization's longing to understand the cosmos, to bring the stars into human hands, and to make sense of the cycles that guide all life. May this story remind you that curiosity is never truly lost, that knowledge can sleep beneath the waves or within forgotten pages, waiting patiently to be awakened again. And perhaps, the next time you look up at the night sky, you'll feel a kinship with those ancient astronomers who believed that with enough care and imagination, even the universe could be measured. Thank you for listening, and until our next story, may your own curiosity carry you to unexpected discoveries.